When you study the First World War long enough, you eventually stop being shocked by the brutality of trench warfare and start becoming fascinated by the small, ingenious survival decisions made by ordinary soldiers. This is one of those stories. When industrialized warfare met the mud-choked front lines of Europe, men quickly understood that the standard-issue uniform offered about as much protection as a wet handkerchief against flying shrapnel, ricocheting bullets, and collapsed trench debris. So they adapted, they scavenged, they repurposed the waste of the battlefield into armour that, in many cases, kept them alive long enough to see another sunrise. And if you're a military historian or a survival-minded viewer, the lessons here are not only fascinating, they're practical. The ability to turn discarded material into functional protection is as relevant today as it was in 1916. This guide will show you precisely how WWI soldiers did it, why it worked, and how those same principles can apply in modern off-grid or emergency situations. Let's get into the history and the survival knowledge encoded inside it. How soldiers recognized that industrial warfare demanded improvised armor. By 1915, it became brutally clear that artillery, not rifles, was the true killer of WWI. More than half of all battlefield casualties came from explosive fragmentation, not direct gunfire. Shrapnel shells scattered iron balls and twisted metal at high velocity across trenches, and even near misses produced lethal splinters. Soldiers watched men die from tiny fragments travelling faster than the eye could trace. That observation changed the mentality of entire units. They realised that even thin layers of metal could deflect or slow fragments enough to give them a chance. The logic was simple. Stop the small, survive the big. This wasn't theoretical. They watched homemade protection save lives in front of them, and word spread fast. How helmets and body plates evolved from improvised experiments before becoming official gear. The standard British Brodie helmet, French Adrian helmet and German Stahlhelm didn't appear fully formed. Before official equipment reached the front, soldiers were fashioning crude head protection from mess tins, metal bowls and sheet scraps. Welders and blacksmiths within regiments bent, hammered and riveted pieces together, often lining them with wool, canvas or leather to cushion the blunt impact of debris. Officers initially mocked these contraptions, calling them unnecessary weight. But casualty data spoke louder. Not only did these improvised helmets reduce head wounds, they gave soldiers the confidence to keep their heads above the trench lip a little longer, just long enough to spot enemy movements or incoming fire. When official helmets finally arrived, they were directly shaped by the improvised prototypes soldiers had already been testing in the mud. How frontline troops turned junk steel into torso protection that actually worked. Body armour wasn't standard for most troops, so men crafted their own from whatever the battlefield provided. Artillery shell casings, ration tins, stove plates, vehicle scraps and broken tools all found new life as protection. Soldiers hammered these pieces flat, using trench shovels as anvils. They shaped them to fit over the chest, abdomen or shoulders. Some men slipped sheets of metal between two layers of their uniform, stitching them in place with field needles. Others tied plates to their webbing or hung them from belts. Even a few millimeters of mild steel could stop or deflect slow-moving shrapnel or debris from trench cave-ins. Diaries from British and French troops describe fragments bouncing off homemade plates with a sound that stayed burned into memory. German stormtroopers took this to an extreme, attaching heavier segmented plates to leather harnesses for assault operations. While cumbersome, these improvised cuirasses saved lives in close quarters, fighting where grenades were the primary threat. When soldiers had no other alternatives, trench tools became both weapons and armour. One of the lesser-known adaptations was repurposing entrenching tools, those small shovels carried by nearly every soldier, as makeshift shields. Men would hold them in front of their face or chest during grenade exchanges or when peeking over parapets. The curved steel, though it was thin, was often just thick enough to deflect a shard or splinter that would otherwise bury itself in bone. Some soldiers went a step further, bolting extra scraps to the shovel's surface, turning it into a compact defensive plate. This dual use meant troops didn't have to lug around extra weight just for protection. Instead, they simply upgraded what they already depended on every single day. So, how do these principles translate into practical survival techniques today? Well, the value here isn't just nostalgia, it's transferable knowledge. The first principle is that honestly layered protection dramatically increases your survival odds, even if you're working with low-quality material. If you ever needed some makeshift protective gear, whether it's for welding, cleaning up debris after a storm, or in a real emergency, you can replicate the same approach. Flat scrap metal, car body panels, stove parts, tool heads, even the backing from old appliances can be reshaped with a hammer and a solid surface, just like soldiers use trench shovels as anvils. Adding simple padding, cloth, leather or folded fabric helps reduce blunt trauma too. In a step-by-step survival context, you'd first identify your most likely threat, flying debris, low-velocity fragments or impact, then select the material with the highest rigidity-to-weight ratio you can find. Shape it to cover your most vulnerable zones, head, chest and face. Tie or strap it to your existing clothing or gear. The big lesson from the First World War is that perfect equipment isn't necessary. Functional protection is born from understanding the threat and using whatever material you have at hand. What really stands out isn't the equipment, but the mindset. These soldiers faced conditions that stripped warfare down to its most primitive, stay alive with whatever you can build. Their ingenuity actually forced militaries to adopt designs that became standard for decades. The Brodie helmet, for example, influenced modern ballistic shapes. The concept of modular plating led to the fragmentation vests of the Second World War and eventually to modern body armour. It all started because individual soldiers simply refused to let the battlefield dictate their odds. If you learned something new from this guide and want more deep-dive battlefield survival history, make sure you subscribe, share this video with fellow enthusiasts, and help grow this community of serious history minds.